Let's go to the US now, which says it won't support any Israeli plans to conduct a major military operation in Rafah. White House spokesman John Kirby warned that doing so would be a disaster for the more than 1 million civilians who fled there. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the military would soon enter the city to target Hamas, calling it one of the militants' last remaining strongholds.
Smoke rises over the crowded city of Rafah. Israeli bombardments in preparation for a ground assault into what it says is a stronghold for Hamas, which is classified as a terrorist organization by many countries. But for hundreds of thousands of Gazans who have fled to the southern end of the Strip after being told by the Israeli army to leave their homes further north, Rafah is the last refuge. It's also home to one of the biggest border crossings for aid and supplies. Israel says Rafah also houses multiple tunnels that Hamas uses to supply itself with arms. The shelling has already taken its toll here, even before soldiers arrive. 3 missiles hit this same place where I'm standing. There's not much to say about the victims, children, women, and the elderly. I wish we could have collected their whole bodies. Instead, we have bits and pieces. We're all hearing that there will be a ground incursion into Rafah. I imagine things will be extremely bad. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists there's no alternative to the military collapse of Hamas. There is no solution other than total victory. If Hamas survives in Gaza, it is only a matter of time until the next massacre, and the axis of evil of Iran and its proxies will continue their campaign. We instructed the army to prepare to operate also in Rafah and in 2 of the camps in the center, the last remaining strongholds of Hamas. With peacemaking efforts apparently stalled for the time being, the people of Rafah will pay the price for both sides' unwillingness to come to a deal.
For more on the American perspective on the situation, let's go across to Janelle Dumalaon from our Washington bureau. It's good to see you, Janelle. The US says it will not support an Israeli operation in Rafah. Have any more details emerged?
Indeed, we heard from both the White House and the State Department today, both of them saying that Washington will not back an assault into Rafah. Earlier, we heard from National Security Council spokesman John Kirby saying that they had not seen any evidence that Israel was in fact planning to do this imminently. Nevertheless, Washington feels it is important to warn that this would represent disaster, that this would represent terrible humanitarian effects. We are, of course, talking about 1.2 million people sheltering there. Now, it is not clear what the U.S. would do at this point if Israel decided to proceed with such an incursion. But if the death toll in Gaza approaching 28,000 is anything to go by, despite U.S. entreaties, then we can probably tell at this point it is probably fair to say that that such U.S. entreaties are not falling on the most receptive of ears.
So a clear warning, but no more details about how the U.S. will put this pressure. Is it possible that this will have an effect on the aid package for Israel that the Senate is debating?
Well, that's difficult to say in advance, but just to back up a little, what we're talking about here is the foreign aid package being currently debated in the Senate, as you said. So within this package, $14 billion should be earmarked for security assistance for Israel, $10 billion to go to civilians affected by, towards humanitarian assistance for civilians affected by war in the West Bank, Gaza, and Ukraine. Now, the bill is at a stage where amendments are going to be proposed to it. This is a bill that is probably going to stay on the Senate floor until next week. However, what is going to be interesting to watch out for is whether Democrats, especially from Democratic senators, especially from the left wing of the party, if they will be able to push through amendments that would compel recipients of such security assistance from the U.S. to be able to only use U.S. weapons in accordance with international international humanitarian law and not impede efforts to get humanitarian assistance to civilians. Now, these are amendments that might not mention Israel specifically by name, but what could happen is the news of such an incursion into Rafah might focus minds and might further lend urgency to efforts for lawmakers to get Washington to use the leverage that it has over Israel.
Quite a bit to follow there. DW's Janelle Dumalaon in Washington. Thank you so much for doing that for us.